Now you can give that old Jeep of yours the drivability and performance benefits it deserves with Sniper BBD from Holley. I'm going to take you step by step through the complete install using our CJ. It's an 84 CJ7 with the original 258 cubic inch inline 6, sporting a Carter BBD carb. Holley's Sniper BBD kit was designed for use on 1971 through 1986 Jeep CJs with this engine combo. And although you probably won't see these numbers from your trusty inline 6, a pair of 100 pound-per-hour injectors make Sniper BBD more than capable of supporting up to 350 horsepower naturally aspirated. I'm also going to show you how to upgrade your stock ignition system with the Hyperspark distributor, ignition box, and coil. Well, let's get started. Step 1 is safety, so we'll remove the negative battery terminal from the battery before proceeding. Removing the wing nuts from the carburetor stud and the mounting stud on the valve cover will allow us to remove the air cleaner lid. You'll also need to remove the fresh air duct. Now when you remove the base, there's going to be a bunch of vacuum lines connected, so it's always a good idea to use some tape and label them, so that way when we reinstall we know exactly where they go. Go ahead and disconnect all the vacuum lines that are on the carburetor and label them as needed. Use the appropriate wrench to remove the factory fuel line. I'll eliminate the hard line and block it off with the mechanical pump later. We also need to disconnect any wires or electrical connections that are attached to the carburetor before we remove it. And then last but not least, the throttle linkage. Now we can remove the 4 nuts that secure the carburetor to the manifold. Once that's accomplished, we can remove the carburetor assembly. If any of the vacuum lines are damaged or appear to be damaged, now's a good time to take care of them. Clean the gasket mating surface if necessary and install a new base gasket. Some models may have a spacer like this one. If yours does, be sure to install it with a gasket on the top and bottom. Before you install the Sniper throttle body, it's a good idea to install the new air cleaner bail with the included hardware. This lessens the chance of losing a screw in the engine bay, or worse yet, down the intake. Once you've got the bail secured, we can set the throttle body on the intake and install the 4 nuts to secure it. Tighten the nuts in a crisscross pattern, then torque them to 60 to 80 inch-pounds. While we're here, we can reinstall the throttle lever. Simply snap it into place and check for any binding or interference issues before proceeding. Carefully reconnect the vacuum lines we removed earlier from the carburetor. Plug off any vacuum sources that will not be used on both the Sniper throttle body and the engine. Sniper EFI includes a coolant temp sensor. This needs to be installed in a 3/8 inch port in either the intake manifold or your cylinder head. To avoid making too much of a mess, you can drain some of the coolant from the radiator before removing the old sensor or plug. I'm going to install the sensor in the intake for this particular vehicle. Never install the temp sensor in the thermostat housing or any location that will not see a constant flow of coolant. Make sure you apply some thread sealer or thread tape if your sensor doesn't already have some. Be careful not to cross thread or over tighten the sensor. Once installed, you can connect it to the appropriate lead that comes from the throttle body. Next, you'll need to locate a good position for mounting the wideband O2 sensor in the exhaust system. It should be located as close to the engine as possible while still providing a good average of all the cylinders. If your Jeep has a header, the sensor needs to be 1 to 10 inches after the collector. Remember, the O2 sensor needs to be positioned at least 10 degrees from level and at a downward angle. This helps prevent any condensation from building up on the tip and possibly damaging your sensor. We can now install the O2 sensor, tighten, then connect it to the lead that comes from the throttle body. Now we can move on to the electrical connections. You'll need a clean, dedicated 12-volt switch source. This needs to have power not only in the cranking position, but also when the key is in the run position. First though, we'll need to reconnect the negative battery terminal so we can do some testing. Using a test light, I've located a clean switch 12-volt source that has power in both the run and cranking position. I'll connect the pink wire from the Sniper throttle body here with the appropriate electrical terminal. First, we'll need to connect the power harness to the corresponding connector found on the Sniper throttle body. You can temporarily lay out the power harness, but don't zip tie it just yet. In this case, to gain access to the cabin, I'm going to go through this grommet in the firewall. I ran the pink wire inside the Jeep to the fuse panel, and now I'm pulling the CAN bus cable for our handheld through to the engine bay, and I'll make the connection to the throttle body. And then we'll need to go inside and connect to our 12-volt switch source. Now you need to be sure and disconnect the negative battery terminal again before we proceed. Now we can terminate the ends of our red and black wire and connect them to the corresponding terminals on our battery. Never run them through a switch, relay, or distribution box. The heavy blue wire that you'll find in the wiring harness is to power your fuel pump. Since it has a built-in relay, it can be connected directly to the positive terminal found on your fuel pump. You have lots of options when it comes to supplying fuel to your Sniper EFI system. For this install, I'm going to use the Sniper replacement fuel tank and a Holley direct fit EFI pump module. Since I'll be replacing the stock tank with a new one from Sniper EFI, I'll first need to remove this rock guard and remove the old one. Next, I can install the new fuel pump module in our Sniper tank before installing it. Start by installing the included O-ring in the recessed channel, then line up the indexing pin on the pump with the index hole found in the hydromat. Press firmly on the filter base until it's fully seated. Now slowly feed the filter into the tank, making sure that you don't cut or snag it on the tank opening. Once the filter and pump assembly are in the tank, you'll have to remove the two screws that hold the fuel level sender and float arm to the module. Now feed the float into the opening and reposition it so the screws align with the mounting tab on the module again. Then tighten both screws. Drop the module the rest of the way into the tank, aligning the tab on the tank with the notch in the module. Then install the new retainer ring and tighten it with a brass drift and hammer until it's fully seated. Next, we can plug in the included harness lead and make the connections for power to the pump using the heavy blue wire from our Sniper harness. Make sure you use a good clean chassis ground, and since the Holley module also includes a fuel level sender, we can connect it to the factory wiring for our dash gauges. We need to run a supply and return fuel line to the Sniper unit in the engine bay. I'll start here at the tank, and using the correct EFI rated fuel lines, I'll install and secure them to the tank. Make sure you're using EFI rated fuel line and clamps. Install the new Sniper fuel tank, then reinstall the factory rock guard. When supplying fuel to any EFI system, we recommend a 100 micron pre-filter and a 10 micron post-filter. Since the hydromat on our Holley pump module acts as our pre-filter, I only need to add this 10 micron filter to our supply line. Once again, I'll secure it using EFI rated clamps. Now I can route and secure the fuel lines along the frame rail, working my way from the tank to the engine bay. Be sure to avoid any moving parts or high heat areas that could compromise the fuel line's integrity. Once you have the fuel line safely secured and run to the engine bay, we can cut and remove any excess hose, then install the fittings using EFI rated clamps. Be sure you connect the fuel lines to the appropriate fittings found on the Sniper throttle body and tighten. Sniper has a built-in fuel pressure regulator, so there's no need to purchase or mount an external unit. Let's focus on the ignition system now. Sniper EFI will work just fine with the stock mechanical distributor and inductive coil. But if you want to get all the benefits of ignition timing control, you'll need to upgrade to a magnetic or a Hall effect style distributor. We have several distributor options from MSD, Holley, as well as Sniper for timing control, and complete wiring instructions can be found on our website. The first thing we'll need to do is rotate our engine and find top dead center on the number 1 cylinder and make sure it's on the compression stroke. To locate the number 1 cylinder, simply trace the plug wire from the front cylinder back to the distributor. They're numbered 1 to 6 from front to back, and put a mark on both the cap and housing. Slowly rotate the engine in the direction of normal operation until the rotor is aligned with your mark. We also need to verify top dead center on the harmonic balancer. The timing indicator should be real close to the 0 mark on your tab. If not, continue rotating the engine until they both align. Now remove the coil and plug wires, as well as any vacuum lines that may be attached to the distributor. Notice that the rotor is pointed to the location of our number 1 spark plug wire. It's a good idea to wipe or blow off any debris around the base of the distributor that may fall into the engine once it's removed. Loosen and remove the bolt to the distributor hold down. Next, gently lift up on the distributor housing to remove it. Note that the rotor rotates slightly when it's removed. This is due to the helical cut gears, and you'll have to take this into account when reinstalling a new distributor. On this Jeep, I'm going to be installing the HyperSpark distributor, CD ignition box, as well as a new coil. Since they were designed to work with the Sniper EFI kits, they'll be an easy install. Install the new gasket to the base of the HyperSpark distributor. If needed, you can apply a small dab of silicone to keep it in place. Be sure to coat the new gear with some engine oil, or if your engine is new or has just been rebuilt, apply some moly grease to the gear instead. I like to try and position the rotor so it's pointed towards the number 1 plug wire, just like it was on our old distributor. But the direction in which the rotor is pointed isn't as crucial, since the phasing cap will index it correctly. It simply changes the location of the number 1 plug wire on our distributor cap and may move the wire leads on the distributor to a less than desirable location. Remember, the rotor will rotate slightly during the installation process, so you'll have to compensate for this. In some engines, it may even be necessary to rotate the oil pump shaft slightly to get it to align with the drive on the bottom of the distributor. You can do this using an old oil pump priming tool, or in some cases even a long flat blade screwdriver. Once you have the distributor fully seated and the drive gear and oil pump are meshed, place the black adapter ring on the distributor and position it so the tab on the ring drops into the notch found in the distributor housing. Then install the clear cap that's included in the kit over the rotor. Slowly rotate the distributor housing until the clear cap drops down onto the rotor and the tab found on the adapter ring engages into the recessed notch on the clear cap. This step phases the distributor housing. Finally, reinstall and tighten the distributor hold down. With the distributor alignment process complete, the rotor should now be pointed in the general location of our number 1 spark plug terminal once we install the distributor cap. You'll notice a small raised notch on the side of the clear cap. This notch indicates the location of the terminal for our number 1 plug wire. I like to make a mark on the distributor housing directly below this notch in the plastic cap, verifying the location of our number 1 plug wire. Install the new distributor cap, then secure it with the included screws. We can then install the number 1 plug wire on the terminal above our mark. Go ahead and install the rest of your plug wires, following the correct firing order and distributor rotation. On Jeeps with the 258 cubic inch engine, the firing order is 153, 624 in a clockwise direction. Note that the stock plug wires will not work on the new cap. Your plug wires will have to be swapped out for a set that will work with an HEI style terminal. Once all the wires are installed, use the supplied wire retainer to keep them in place. Next, you'll need to locate the 3-pin wire harness that's supplied with the HyperSpark distributor. Plug the 2-pin connector from the distributor harness into the corresponding 2-pin connector found on the Sniper main harness. The connectors are keyed and the green and purple wires should match up. Now plug the 3-pin connector on the distributor into the 3-pin connector from the harness. Next, we'll need to connect the pink wire to the same switch 12-volt source that we connected our pink wire from the Sniper main harness to earlier. Installing one of our HyperSpark CD ignition boxes and coils is not required to run Sniper EFI, but they can definitely give your Jeep some added benefits, and they're super easy to install with our plug-and-play connectivity. Locate a safe and convenient location to mount your Sniper CD ignition box that's away from high heat and moving parts. I chose the inner fender well. It was necessary for me though to move the starter solenoid down about 6 inches from its original position. Connect the main wire harness to the box and run the red and black wires directly to your battery. Our HyperSpark CD ignition box needs a points output signal. We can obtain that by using the auxiliary input-output harness that's found in the Sniper EFI kit. Simply plug the harness into your Sniper EFI and connect the white points output wire from the Sniper throttle body to the white wire found on the HyperSpark ignition harness. Any unused wires on the harness can be unpinned and removed or simply tied up and out of the way for future use. Run the light gauge red wire that's on the connector next to the white wire to the same switch 12-volt source we use for our pink wires from the Sniper EFI and HyperSpark distributor. We can now mount and install our HyperSpark coil. Don't forget to connect it to the distributor with a coil wire. The HyperSpark ignition can also be used with most stock and aftermarket coils. If your coil does not use a TFI style connector, simply cut the connector off and install the ring terminals, and then secure them to the appropriate terminals found on your coil. Orange is for positive, and the brown with an orange tracer is the negative. If your vehicle has a ballast resistor in line with the coil wiring, we recommend that you bypass it or remove it entirely from the system. Since I'm not using the coil that's in the stock location, I'll terminate the wires and remove the coil. We're now ready to launch the startup wizard. This can be done using the handheld touchscreen, so we'll first need to reconnect our negative battery terminal, that way we have power. But before we do, it's always a good idea to flush the fuel lines of any debris that could cause damage to our injectors or other fuel components. Simply remove the fuel supply line from the throttle body and place it in a petroleum-safe container. That way it catches any debris that may have entered the lines. Now we can start the wizard. Turn the key to the run position, but do not crank or attempt to start the engine at this time. From the home screen, select the wizard icon from the main menu, then select the Sniper system that you're installing, BBD in our case. Next, you'll have to select the number of cylinders that your engine has and select Next. Use the slider bar to input the cubic inch displacement of the engine, 258 for our engine. Now we need to set the desired idle speed for coolant temperatures above 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Use the slider to set the target RPM, then press Next. The ECU also needs to know the cam type. For most street and street performance camshafts, the stock mild selection is what you'll use. Select the cam type and then click Next. This step is to select the type of ignition system you are using. As I talked about before, Sniper EFI will work with stock and performance inductive coils and CD boxes for installations that are not using timing control. If you want to control ignition timing, you'll need a magnetic or Hall effect distributor. I've installed the HyperSpark distributor and ignition system, so I'll select the HyperSpark option, click Next. Use the cursor to select the total timing at wide open throttle. I'm going to set ours at 32 degrees. After you've answered all the questions in the wizard, a calibration will be created for you. Press the start button to send the calibration to the ECU and wait for a screen to appear indicating the file is uploaded. Press OK. Once the file is uploaded, you'll need to cycle the ignition key off, then back to the run position again. You should hear the fuel pump prime for approximately 5 seconds. I like to go ahead and cycle the key another 3 or 4 times, pushing any fuel and debris through the fuel lines and into our catch container. Once you're satisfied that the fuel lines are clear, you can reattach the supply line to the throttle body and tighten the fitting. One more cycle of the key should pressurize the lines, and now is a good time to thoroughly check the fuel system for any leaks. Before we can attempt to start the vehicle, we need to verify that the system sensors are operating properly. To do this, turn the key to the run position, and from the home screen select the monitor icon, then the monitor screen. An icon named Initial Startup should appear. Select this icon. Engine RPM should show stall. Once you crank the engine, it will show sinking and then show the actual engine RPM. The TPS or throttle position sensor should read 0. If you slowly depress the throttle to wide open, it should read between 85 and 100% at wide open throttle. If it doesn't, you'll need to verify that your throttle linkage is allowing full travel of the throttle arm. MAP or manifold air pressure sensor should read from 95 to 102, but at higher elevations it could read as low as 75. The CTS or coolant temperature sensor reads engine temperature, and it will read ambient coolant temperature until the engine is started. The IAC, or idle air control position. I'll address this when we get to the idle setting and throttle plate setting section. Battery. It will show the normal battery voltage, and you should read at least 12 volts minimum. If any of these sensors do not read properly, the issue must be resolved before proceeding or attempting to start the engine. If you haven't done so already, now is a good time to go back and make sure that you have all the wiring routed away from moving parts and high heat areas, and that the connections are secure. Wrap up and zip tie any loose or excess wires. You can also depin any unused wires in the input and output harness now. You should also perform the pre-start checklist that's outlined in the installation manual. With the handheld still on the initial startup screen, turn the key and crank the engine over. Watch the RPM parameter. It should go from stall to syncing, then to registering the actual engine RPMs as it fires and starts running. If the engine does not fire, you'll need to follow the flowchart in the Sniper EFI troubleshooting guide found at holley.com. If the engine runs, but you find that the idle is too low and it wants to stall, you may have to open the idle speed screw on the throttle body slightly. Once the vehicle is started and is idling good, double check for any fuel or coolant leaks. We'll also need to verify the ignition timing using the touchscreen and a timing light. First, we need to lock the static timing. To do this, from the home screen, select the tuning icon, then select System, and then Static Timing. Slide the cursor to 15 degrees and click Set. Now you'll have to connect the timing light and verify that you have 15 degrees of timing at the balancer. If it does not read 15 degrees before top dead center, you'll have to loosen the distributor hold down and rotate the distributor until the values match. Don't forget to retighten the hold down when you're finished. Now that we've verified the timing, we can click clear on the handheld and the Sniper is now controlling ignition timing. Once the engine coolant has reached a temperature of at least 160 degrees, we can adjust our idle speed to the RPMs that we selected in the startup wizard. To do this, select the monitor icon from the home screen, then multi-gauge, and finally the sensors tab. With the vehicle in neutral and parking brake applied, rotate the curb idle adjustment screw open or closed until the IAC reading is between 2 and 10%. If your TPS registers above 0, you'll need to cycle the ignition switch, turning the engine off, then back on to reset the TPS back to 0. Now that the idle is set, we can install the factory air cleaner. Install the new sealing gasket included in the kit on the throttle body, then align the air cleaner assembly on the studs and tighten both wing nuts. Attach the fresh air duct and you're finished. Congratulations! With the stock air cleaner installed, you're now ready to hit the road and let Sniper self-tune while you enjoy the drive. Don't forget to refer to our quick start guide and follow the instructions found under the first drive section. Try to perform your first drive in an area without too much traffic, and if you can, take a friend along. They can watch the gauges while you concentrate on the driving. Thanks for watching. To see more great how-to videos, visit our website at sniperefi.com.